Welcome, everyone. Good evening from Northbrook, Illinois, just outside Chicago. My name is Lucy Gray, and I am the co-chair of the Global Education Conference, along with Steve Hargadon, who's here with us tonight. And we're really excited to have you join us for our inaugural Global Ed TV webinar that we're doing in partnership with Know My World. It's going to be an excellent time tonight with special guests, and we're so glad to have you all here tonight. If you're not familiar with the Global Education Conference, let me tell you briefly about us. We are, our conference runs in November for about a week and focuses on globally connective opportunities for all educators and people interested in global education. We also have expanded to do more efforts, including Global Leadership Day, which is coming up, Global Collaboration Day, and Global Education Day. It's a little confusing. But if you go to Global Ed events, the link I'll provide in the chat in a little while, you can see more about what we do. More importantly, our partner in this webinar series is Lisa Petro of Know My World. This is a little bit about Know My World, and I'm sure Lisa will tell you about them, but we're excited to partner with them and bring you this webinar series from now until June. So there's going to be a webinar from Lisa and her team every month on a different topic, and if you go to globaled.tv, you can see the list of webinars they have planned. In addition to that, I will be doing some broadcasts that are more conversational using a tool called Mixler. And we're still scheduling those right now. So we're trying to aim for two kind of webinar type events every month to continue the global ed conversation beyond the Global Education Conference and to get people excited about the potential of Global Education Conference, or of global education in general. So, so Lisa is going to tell you a little bit more about Know My World as she gets started, and I just want to have everybody introduce themselves in the chat. If you can find the chat window, it should be to your left, but you can also click on it and drag it out if you want to see it a little bit more expanded. And in the chat, I want you to say where you're from and your grade level or interest in global education. And then I'd like you to take this little star tool to the left of the whiteboard. It looks like a star, and click on that, and then is it double clicking? And then click where you are on the map, and then we can get an idea of who's logging in for this webinar tonight. And it looks like we've got South America representing, we've got the East Coast representing, definitely in the United States. We've got Canada, Mexico maybe. So if you click to the left-hand side of the whiteboard, you'll see some tools, and you right now have whiteboard privileges so that you can click on the second tool, which looks like a star, or you can choose a different icon if you want to, and then click where you are in on the map. Okay, Keely, if you have a question, ask it in the chat, and we'll be happy to help you with it. Somebody has a big smiley face over New York, I think it is. Okay, I'll give everybody a few more seconds here to make their mark on the map and tell us in the chat where you're from. We've got West Hartford, we've got Henry Harbo in Chicago, we've got San Francisco, New York. We've got a couple of New York people here, Elaine from Canada, Florida. Great. Washington, D.C., Barry. All right, and Peggy from Phoenix. So it looks like we've got a great concentration in the United States tonight, and hopefully people will be watching this webinar later on from other parts of the world. Thank you to our sponsors, VIF International Education, TES, Global Education Conference, Know My World, and the Learning Revolution. We just want to give a shout out to the people who make these events free and available to educators. And with that, without further ado, I'm going to turn over to Lisa Petro, and she's going to tell you about herself and her guests and get going with our webinar tonight.
I'm really excited.
Thanks, Lisa,
Know My
for
World
coming.
is very honored to partner with Global Education Conference to deliver this series and really explore what is competence in global education. What does that look like? Just a little background, Know My World, we're an organization that focuses on global education, but specifically looks at the elements of social, emotional, cultural, and academic learning. We do that through digital exchange experiences, coaching teachers and the kinds of methods and tools they would need to have effective projects with partners in the world, and also through professional development and specialized projects. So again, we're really excited to open this up, and I'd just like to set a little bit of intention for this series. Our goal here is we realize that there's a lot of educators out in the world that are already doing these kinds of practices, that are really embodying global education in their classrooms and in their learning communities. And so we'd really like to bridge that gap between that tacit knowledge, or what we're not really aware that we're doing, but we're kind of doing it naturally, with some of the research in the field, some of the expert experiences, and also some of the best practices that exist. So we'll be exploring that over the next 5 months. Today, however, we want to look at competence in global education, and what does that exactly mean? So the overview of the session, first we're just going to identify some keywords and some areas of learning that make up global and cultural competence in education. And then we're going to look briefly at what is the basis for creating competency. And then we'll have 2 examples, one a multicultural competence model from Mexico, and another a global competence model that was created in the U.S., but the research was based globally, so it was a universal inclusion of many countries all over the world. And at the end of this, we'll provide you with some resources for further investigation. So I want to point out as we begin that this is a complex topic, and there has been research for roughly 50 years in the field of global education, cultural competence, global competence. Currently, as we stand, there's over 20 definitions and models for this level of competency, and there's also approximately 140 assessments. We're hoping that through this series we'll really get to look at some pieces of that, but I strongly encourage the audience to really dig in and investigate and read about the information that's out there. Some notable contributors to the field and that began in the 90s and in the 2000s, and their models are also present here. Dr. Milton Bennett in the model of intercultural sensitivity, Michael Byram in the intercultural communicative competence, Dr. Darla Deardorff in her process model focusing on internal and external outcomes, Dr. Bill Howe and Penelope Lisi, their model for personal development and multicultural ed, and of course Dr. Bill Hunter and the global competence model. So I really encourage you to go further. Today we're very lucky. We have 2 amazing guests with us. We have Maria Jose Pineda Guerin from Prepa Tecnológico de Monterrey in Monterrey, Mexico, and she's going to talk a little bit about the model that has been developed for the high school campuses there. And we also have Christy Hunter, who is the CEO of Global Leadership Excellence, and also has been working progressively for the past 17 years on furthering the idea of global competence in education. So to begin, I want to think a little bit about what goals and keywords are associated with global education. And I asked some practitioners all over the world what they thought that meant. So Steve, would you mind queuing up some of these videos so we can just see a few responses?
One second, they said keep talking. I'm almost there.
No problem. I can just make mention of who we have. Annie Tung is a teacher at AST, American School Taichung in Taiwan for elementary school. We have Julie is from Philippines, and Toti is from Ivory Coast in Africa.
So here we go with the first video. If it doesn't start for you automatically, do click the play button. If you can't see it because you're behind a firewall or YouTube is blocked, we'll put a link in the chat and you can look at it later.
Great. So that was Annie from American School Taichung, and now perhaps we can hear Julie Bansure from San Francisco, Philippines. Great. And then we have Toti Diale from Ivory Coast. Great. Thanks, Steve. So as you can see, listening to these different responses from all over the world, there are lots of keywords and goals, and they can vary based on the different cultural contexts. But essentially, we're coming around to a very similar point of view. And so embracing those gaps and realizing those differences and realizing those similarities as well, we can pull out some of the keywords that are common. So some things like respect, awareness, sensitivity, critical thinking, global issues, solidarity and justice, global citizenship, these are all components of being culturally competent or being globally competent. But alone, they don't work. They work together in a full understanding. So what's really at the foundation for that competence? What brings everything together? And through research, we found that there's 4 major areas. There's the knowledge of an understanding of other cultures. There's attitudes that enable us to really navigate those cultural gaps. There's skills to think critically about what we're experiencing. And then there's also behaviors, or sometimes also called actions or outcomes, that really represent the actions, or really represent all of these areas coming together. And so competency is more than just knowing. Competency is a fluency. It's lots of things happening together at the same time in a daily practice. And so in this series, we really want to look at, well, what does that look like when it's taught? How can we organize? How can we create something that integrates into curriculum and that gives students opportunities and experience to really explore and develop a fluency, develop a level of competence? And that's where I'd like to turn it over to my guests today. Both guests have brilliant models, one in multicultural competence, another in global competence, and they're going to explain to you and share with you what has been developed. So Maria Jose, I'd like to invite you to come on and talk about what you've created at Prepatec in Mexico.
Thank you, Lisa. And first of all, thank you for the invitation. I think it's great to have the opportunity to share with all of you the way that we have been addressing and working in the multicultural education. I think that I will say that, well, first of all, I'm from Mexico. I'm right now in Monterrey, Mexico, in the north part of Mexico. And I would like to start giving you brief ideas about the context of our educational institution. Prepatec is the high school division of Tecnológico de Monterrey, who is a private university system who has presence in all over Mexico. We have been founded in 1943, so compared with some universities, we are not so old, but comparing with Mexico, we are quite still. We are 70 years more or less. And right now, Tecnológico Monterrey offers the range of educational systems from PhD, master's, undergraduate, and high school programs. We are, all of us together, we are about 80,000 students, and out of those, more than 26,000 are students of high school. In Mexico, the high school is 3 years. We go from 10, 11, 12. And Prepatec, it's a high school who has a strong orientation to going into university. So 99% probably, or even more of our students, they follow a career. Around 60% of them, they will have the career in the Tecnológico, and others will go abroad or to other universities in Mexico. An important thing for us is that we are a multi-campus system. That means we are present in different states. We are 25 cities. We have 31 campus. And that's important when we are talking about multicultural education, because in the way that we have addressed, for us, multiculturality starts in Mexico. We are really a very diverse and multicultural country. If you had the opportunity to travel around Mexico, you can find that there is completely a different way of living, the culture, the food, even the way that we talk. And if we put together the ethnicity that we have around our country, that gives us like a big strength, but at the same time, we wanted our students to really recognize the diversity that we have among us, and not just recognize, to embrace that. So for us, multicultural education should be something that to become aware of our own diversity, and from that to go and build a global competency or a multicultural lead. I would like to share a little bit how was it like our journey into this multicultural education. Around the late 80s, we started what we call bicultural program. It was very logical to think about that it was very important for our students to have a good performance in English. So the bicultural program was designed to give students the fluency in English. More or less 50% of the curriculum was part of taught in English, the rest in Spanish. And at more or less at the same time, in the 90s, we started also offering the international baccalaureate. It is not for all the campus. Out of our 31 campus, just 10 of our 31 offer right now the international baccalaureate. But then when we were going into the 21st century, we were thinking about, okay, what does it mean to be really global citizens, a citizen of the 21st century? And then it was when the multicultural program started. That's a little bit of our background. One thing that I would like to share is at the beginning, we started this idea about forming our students in a more multicultural way, giving a lot of opportunities for our students to go abroad. So our students, for example, as I said, we are from 10, 11, and 12 grades. They have a lot of opportunities to go abroad. These numbers are just for the last year. More than 3,200 students participated in a formative experience abroad. Those are the different places where we have programs. And these programs can be, for example, as a semester, a summer, or even something more short that we call winter time, that is 2 weeks. And students go abroad and participate, taking some of the courses, or participate in co-curricular activities. And we feel very proud about that, but we were very clear that something was missing. I mean, it was not just about sending the students abroad and not just about learning different languages. So we really were thinking that we needed something to connect the different dimensions of a student's life into this educational experience. We were trying how to really connect the cognitive and the non-cognitive, the interpersonal and the intrapersonal, and the academic skills and what is called also life skills. That's when this model, the idea about having a multicultural education model, began. As Lisa just said, when we are talking about competencies, it's much more than knowing. So we thought that we had to address this multicultural education through a competencies performance or paradigm. This is our multicultural program mission. It's that the students of our Prepatech multicultural program are empowered to impact their communities, countries, and the world as global citizens with awareness, engagement, and action. We know that it's a very ambitious mission, but we truly believe that we have to start with this kind of dream. Our young people deserve that we stay these high standards, and we really think that through the kind of activities that we are performing and designing in the multicultural program, we are helping them to become these global citizens for this 21st century. The Prepatech Multicultural Competencies model, it is comprised of 5 core competencies, as you can see. We have here the multicultural social and emotional learning. We have the multicultural knowledge. We have the multicultural skills, the multicultural communication, and the multicultural engagement. As I just have shared with you before, I think that we have been going quite well in the multicultural communication. Most of our students, they have a good competency in English, and they follow a third language. It depends in the offer that each of our campus has, but many of them take German or French, and also we are offering them Chinese, Japanese, and Italian in some of our campus. On the other hand, the multicultural knowledge, I think that it has been also one thing that has been really well attained. I mean, we cover global issues, we work with them in this kind of knowledge, and also the multicultural skills. I think that most of our programs, I mean, when we are talking about high schoolers, we are talking about teaching them and helping them to become critical thinkers, to become problem solvers. But what we really were probably not going so well or not doing so well was in multicultural social, emotional, and multicultural engagement. Related with the kind of questions that you say that it's an elite institution, well, I will say that it's a private institution. Yes, most of our students come from wealthy families, but we also offer, like 40% of our students have some kind of scholarship. So this is also like a challenge, how to promote this kind of experience and this kind of knowledge for all of our students. So we were talking about the multicultural social and emotional learning like something that probably was missing before. Once that we defined this model, and once that we define each of the competencies, we also work in designing like critical outcomes or learning performance outcomes expected for each of the competencies. We also provide teachers and students with essential questions in order to incorporate them in the daily class life and become this kind of reflection both in the intrapersonal and in the interpersonal activities. One thing that we have decided is that we needed to have like a educational model or teaching strategies to really be sure that we were covering the 5 competencies. So we decided these 6 main activities that we call it 6 core activities. And I mean, I'm just going to go very general in each of them. The first 2 are CML national and international. The CML comes from connected multicultural learning. As probably some of you know, it is this kind of digital exchanges where you connect your students with students from different cities, countries, or regions. For example, for us, the CML national is very important because being a multi-campus university or high school, we want our students to recognize and to be aware that there are differences even in Mexico. I mean, we as Mexicans, we are diverse, and we have different kind of ethnicities and multiculturalities. So this is the first year we work with the students working and exchanging and working in projects or activities with other students from a different region or state. Then there comes the CML International, where Know My World has been a great help. And we also have this partnership with a Face-to-Face, Tony Blair Foundation, who also has been very useful for promoting and for helping our students to connect with the students abroad. And of course, we are, empowering our teachers to try and to find partners to Skype School, or other kind of platforms in order to enrich our curriculum and our daily activities with interchange and ideas from people abroad. Then we come with the community service learning. Each of our students, in order to graduate, they have to participate in a community service learning. And we are making this effort to also work in a more global or multicultural way around this kind of service learning. As I told you, the formative experience abroad is something that we have been doing in the past and we are continuing to do. And we are opening different kind of projects, programs, and opportunities for our students to go abroad. And it depends in the possibilities of the family or the perception and the way that they want it. They can go for a short time or even for a semester, as I told you. Volunteerism is something that we are trying for the first time. We have had students going to Peru and going to different parts like Costa Rica, and they have been working also. And in this way, it is very important for us that the students really not go there as helping others, but go there as equals and work together in this benefit of the community. And we have had so far very good experience, and the students really have been enjoying that. And finally, we have this part of our mission is to have this kind of entrepreneurial mindset. So we are embedding the social enterprise and the social entrepreneurs in our students. I think that's something that is very common for our students, this new generation. They are more into social enterprise than probably the classes before. And in this way, we have been also having a partnership with the L.D. Kaufman Foundation, and has been also very helpful for us. Finally, and just to finish, well, we do recognize that to be able to have this model alive, we need to work together, and we need to recognize that all key players have a special role, and that it's important that teachers, students, the high school director, the parents, the tutors are really participating, that they really understand that we all share the same language and the same values and orientation through multicultural education. And we have also trying to do this to forming in each of our high schools a multicultural committee. This is a committee that it's formed for students, teachers, parents, and representing the voice of the school in order to really have empower of the multicultural education model. I think that in a brief way, this is our model, and I will be happy to answer any kind of questions through the chat or wherever do you think it fits. This is my email. And once again, Lisa, thank you very much for the invitation, and it has been a pleasure to share with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Jose. That was excellent and much appreciated. And I think it segues nicely into our next guest, Christy Hunter, and she can talk a little bit about that very large global competence definition and what that means. So Christy, I'm just going to turn that over to you.
Hello, everyone. As Maria Jose pointed out, there are lots of different ways of looking at these various aspects of global education. And it can get a little confusing because there are lots of different terms, lots of different models and perspectives. But to help make it a little easier, it's helpful to see this Venn diagram, if you will, of three major categories that globalization fall under. Intercultural competence is somewhat related in terminology to other labels like global mindset, multicultural competence, cultural competence, and so forth. I'm going to talk about a slightly larger scope. If anyone's interested in global competence, that's what we'll talk about next. And then there's another even far more reaching term of global citizenship, which we'll talk about a little bit at further on in the conversation. But how did this all begin? Well, the word competence, or competency actually, it's a workplace term, which really talks about a person's ability to do a job or to have a skill set. And if you see, I like to think of competencies as bricks in a wall and laying a strong foundation for future success. So as you see, the bottom layer of this structure, we're building a solid foundation. Global competence is definitely part of that. Other competencies that we all know are important to foster in our students are computing skills and critical thinking and so forth. So these are strong foundational skills that all kids in the 21st century need to acquire and develop. And then as we move up, as a person goes through university and graduates, starts to get their first job, you see the next layer in the wall is greater skills in their particular function or their specialized skills in their work. And then ultimately, someone who has advanced skills further along in their career develops some of those competencies that are in the upper layer. But it's really key to understand how these pieces all fit together in this wall, and the combinations of different competencies ultimately give someone the skills that they can talk about in their resume, or someone in a human resources standpoint might talk about as part of a job description. But how did this concept of global competence come? Well, a lot of people started using this term back in the 1990s, and different people were using it in different ways. My husband started looking into this topic in 1999, so this is the framework of which he began this research. And he recognized that lots of people were using the term and discovering it and basically looking at it as a buzzword. It had been part of his work in higher education, and he is a higher educational professional, but he recognized a lot of folks were using the term global competence and operating somewhat in a vacuum, not necessarily considering other people or what some people call stakeholders who might be downstream or upstream of their work. And this becomes an issue if we're thinking about us in education as being upstream, and who's going down the stream from us might be higher ed. It might be the first employer that student will ultimately come in contact with. So with that, we realized in this research that lots of people were talking about checklists of skills or capabilities, and other folks were getting involved with reinventing the wheel, and got to a point where there wasn't much of a distinction. Instead of they were improving the competency of students, they were just doing more of the same. So he discovered that there really wasn't a whole lot of research on the topic, and there also wasn't much consensus. And ultimately, we can't help build global competence in our students if there is a moving target. But beyond the fact that it didn't consider the perspectives or needs of people downstream, there were really not any global perspectives on this, which was a real challenge, as you can imagine, when trying to define what global competence was. Therefore, he started doing research on this topic to develop a consensus framework, beginning with the end in mind. And with that, it's important that we can prepare our students today for their future successes, and the teachers in their work so they can develop their careers and ultimately help foster student growth as well. So with this, he began work on the topic. and started in 1999. He assembled a worldwide panel of experts to develop this consensus framework. And the individuals came from all continents except for anyone from Antarctica. And the goal was to develop a framework that everyone could believe in, that it made sense not only for education, but the people who are receiving our educated students, the global workforce. So with this, ultimately, a framework was published, a definition as well as a model, which we'll get to in just a moment. So the definition that was first published in his doctoral dissertation in 2004 is what you see on my screen and your screen at this very moment. And that was the first step in the research that was conducted. So it's really a step of understanding of not only the attitudes, which you see in the green area, but also the global or cultural knowledge that a student needs to acquire, and then the interpersonal skills to work and interact effectively with others. The second step in this research to develop a consensus definition and consensus model was to determine the specific knowledge, skills, and attitudes necessary for global competence. So it starts in the core with this Delphi panel of experts from all over the world who developed the definition, began to ferret out what global competence was. And in this work, it should be pointed out that they evaluated any proposed definitions, frameworks, models, any hypotheses as to what global competence might be from the very beginning. And that was their starting point when they began this work. And then they went through and pulled out the salient points of anything that had been proposed up until that time in 1999-2000, and then filled in the gaps. So this model starts in the core of the green area with knowing yourself and how you fit into the society where you are. The next layer out, the darker green area, is your approach to other people and other situations. And risk-taking, for instance, is not jeopardizing your life, but in fact your willingness to stretch your cultural box, your comfort zone, and gain new perspectives. The open-mindedness dimension is rather literal, but it also means having a curiosity to take in information from a wide variety of sources, and then can reconsider different perspectives. Attentiveness to diversity is a two-step process, which unfortunately many people overlook. The first step is the ability to sense or detect difference. This is the part that oftentimes gets unnoticed. Before you can get to the second step, secondly, a person needs to respect the difference that they encounter, because difference is not always so obvious, such as something like skin tone. We refer to these internal readiness dimensions, as you see here, in the green areas as a category, and they're highlighted in this green and central area. The external readiness dimensions come outside that, in areas that you can most inform in the classrooms are starting in the light blue areas. Is your approach to education, and then affords the understanding of interacting with different cultures. So the light blue area is the cultural or global knowledge that a person most easily and most efficiently acquires in their formal educational program. So on the left-hand side, if you were looking at the original model, is global awareness. These are the overt aspects of culture, things such as geography, religion, understanding languages spoken in certain nations and regions, cuisine, native dress, things such as those. Historical perspective is the covert aspects of culture, understanding how and why a culture became what it is. It really translates and goes back to the root cause of major historical events that took place. This fosters an appreciation of empathy for how a culture has become what it is and the values that are inherent in a particular society at this time. The outermost ring, the dark blue ring, is the interpersonal skills. Intercultural capability is our label for intercultural competence. is the ability to adjust your approach to treat others the way they wish to be treated. Other people like to refer to it as things similar to cultural agility or flexibility. And it's really treating other people with the respect that they are due. Collaboration across cultures is a person's ability to work in a team environment and to bridge cultural differences such as expectations of time or deadlines, communication style, personal space, some of those kinds of things that can otherwise hamper a diverse group of people's ability to work well together. And that diversity can be a tremendous asset, but if not worked appropriately, it can become, unfortunately, a great liability in a team's success. So ultimately, the whole model complete. You can start to appreciate the sophistication of skills that develop, starting with knowing yourself, and learning and approaching other individuals, gathering additional education, and then applying your interpersonal skills. So with this empathy, which is a common outcome or question, it actually is an underlying theme across many dimensions of the model. The attitudes such as open-mindedness and attentiveness to diversity, historical perspective in the cultural and global knowledge, as well as intercultural capability and communication across cultures and the people skills. So, as we talked about earlier, how do all of these terms relate? Well, it's important to, again, understand the scope that varies with each of these layers. Global citizenship, or acting for the benefit of the planet or humankind, it requires additional skills and additional motivations to take over the responsibilities of the issues that we all face as citizens of the world. But before someone can be effective in working for the Red Cross, or the Peace Corps, or Engineers Without Borders, for example, a person does need to be globally competent first. So they know how to interact appropriately with people who are actually in the field, the very individuals that you wish to assist. Global competence, therefore, requires that a person does have global skills and global knowledge. So it's a very complex set of skills that does require breadth of knowledge across the whole world, not necessarily specialization in a particular nation or region, although many of us, quite frankly, develop specialization in certain areas of the world. That's not to be diminished in any way, but the key is to truly be globally competent. A person has knowledge around major regions across the entire world. So they have the foundational knowledge, progressive attitudes, as well as sophisticated and ever-developing people skills, so that no matter who a person might interact with, where they might meet that person, totally unprepared in many cases, and can't plan in advance, that person who is globally competent will not only survive, but actually thrive in any kind of circumstance and have enough skills to figure it out and fit in. So basically, my takeaway is keep in mind the impact that all of you have. The most important thing that any of us can do in global education is to lay a strong social studies foundation, as well as to globalize other areas of the curriculum as much as possible. This doesn't have to bear on the shoulders of everyone who's only in social studies, because the goal of all education is to open the mind. And with that, it's important to recognize the ultimate effects that takes on. We actually have an assessment. We regularly note that individuals who are better educated and have higher levels of education score higher, not only in their global knowledge, but also in their attitude. So it's really important also to keep in mind that these are high school students and maybe even university students for some of you who are participating. We can't expect that someone who's in the grade 12 or a graduating senior from college or university is necessarily going to have the same capabilities of someone who has maybe 25 years of work experience. It takes time to develop these skills. They're very complex in nature, and it really takes a lot of experience and interacting with people of lots of different cultures and backgrounds to hone and fine-tune these interpersonal skills. And ultimately, if we set them with a strong, globalized educational understanding, that will really set them on success in their ultimate professional life in whatever field they choose. So my contact information is here as well. Feel free to contact me with other questions.
Thank you, Christy. That was excellent, and I love the reminder. Oftentimes we get caught in the result, and the process is so important. You won't just reach a point where you ring a bell and all of a sudden you're globally competent and your work is done. It's a lifelong process of learning and growth, so I really appreciate that. And just want to point out before we open up to some questions that all of this contact information and a variety of readings and other models for investigation will be provided. I'm going to post a link in the chat box in a moment. And I'm really hoping that these models open up some opportunities for consideration in your own learning communities. And the project-based learning things I've been seeing come up in the chat is perfect. Having that access, giving students opportunities for experience and practicality is a great place to go, and that's where we're going to be kind of heading next in the webinar series as well. So let's open up some questions. So let's see. Lucy or Lisa, would you mind coming on and posing some of those questions?
Sure. We've got some questions in the chat box here from a couple of different people. One of the questions was, how do you help students become more self-aware, and how do you adapt this to different age levels? There was some conversation in the chat box about having to start it at a very young age, so for different age levels and abilities.
In my experience, self-awareness tends to grow as a person better appreciates what it means to be the other. And the more that we start to understand what it means to live in another culture and appreciate different ways of life, different values and perspectives, it helps us to understand our own identity and how we fit into that big puzzle, and better appreciate what it means to be a citizen of a certain country or a certain region, and our own personal preferences, expectations, and values.
Great. Lisa, any other questions?
Yes, Masaru asked, how do we deliver these intentional learning opportunities in a crisis environment or in different crisis environments?
That's an excellent question, and Christy and Maria Jose, I invite you in on that too. But I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is relevancy, really allowing students to bring their experiences that might occur outside of the classroom into the classroom, helping them make meaning of it and applying some of these principles to that.
Christy, Maria Jose?
Would you repeat that question for me, please?
Sure. How would you go about delivering these intentional learning opportunities in crisis environments?
I guess the part that I'm not getting as much as a crisis environment, is that really what you're asking?
Perhaps Masaru could hop on and explain a little more what the question is. It's around the time, if you look in the chat box, 7:44. Social media.
What I'm understanding in crisis situations are students who are involved in tumultuous or precarious situations at home or living in communities in which survival is the primary focus. So that could be anything from violence to poverty, all forms of inequity. That's my interpretation of that question.
Yeah, and Masaru just came on and chatted crisis environment in terms of environments that recently experienced tragedy, reaction to tragedies, and even the larger crises of refugee children.
Yes. Well, I think that probably goes two ways. If you're dealing with the individual who is actually facing the crisis, him or herself, you just really have to get at the foundations of making them feel comfortable. If you're really trying to include them and consider the needs of the very humanistic elements, and I'm not a sociologist or a counselor in any form of that. However, I would suggest really trying to speak with that individual and try to understand what the cultural dynamics are that they're facing, and really get down to the basic needs. And that really is important to make sure that their basic needs and understandings are met. But I'm sorry, I'm challenged with exactly what the need is, because that's a little outside the scope of global competence. It might be a little bit more into the scope of global citizenship, but you really need to make sure you're understanding and communicating well with that person and finding out what would be most beneficial to them in getting oriented, assimilated in a new culture, and trying to make them feel welcomed at home, understanding what their life is like back home, and trying to replicate that as much as possible, especially if a local community is trying to embrace those individuals to make them feel welcomed.
Yeah, and I think something else to point out here is that, you know, at the basis of global competency is the awareness of power and power differentials and how that influences our relationships with each other in the world. So really providing a space for these students to access personal power and feel a sense of equity within their environment, within their situations in their life, and of course in their relationships with others. So I think that is the focus area. How do we create a safe space, first of all, in our schools for students to explore this competency or these competency areas, and also how do we create relationships that are equitable so that they can feel a sense of empowerment. And I think that's probably the basis of how do we align these principles with students who are in crisis situations. Are there any other questions, or if that wasn't answered, if anyone just wants to chime in? I think we have probably room for maybe one more, and then we'll have to wrap it up.
There are two people making requests in the chat box about what the underlying assumptions behind this particular global competence model are. Masaru is asking that, and Shane's asking if we can discuss the measurement tool.
The basic assumptions were made a number of years ago that in the 21st century, which was soon approaching in 1999 and 2000, that everyone would have a computer. That computer skills, that's a separate competency. In fact, that's how most people in the workforce look at that. Technology skills really are not global competence. Other things such as leadership, that's a separate competency. And ironically, they were assuming things such as language skill might be part of this mix. But the research indicated actually that global competence required interaction with anybody. So if you're just learning one language, that doesn't necessarily allow you to communicate with the whole world. However, what we have learned in our research in evaluating global competence amongst individuals and students and working professionals is that language learning is a tremendous vehicle for growing all aspects of global competence. So is travel, international travel and study. There's also tremendous vehicles for growing these skills because of learning about other cultures, practicing communication, and then, of course, opening the mind and the attitudes. But there were very few assumptions given at that point other than the ones that I mentioned about technology and computing skills.
Great. Thank you, Christy. Well, I think that's going to bring us to a point of closure, and I know, Lucy, that you had a few things you wanted to add. So I just want to invite everyone to really get in action. That's going to be the next part of our series, and things to consider. Can you make a list of keywords you think are most important in global education? And what knowledge, skills, attitudes, and actions or outcomes are you working on in your own learning communities around this topic? So I really invite you to explore that in your school. And as I promised, there's a reference list that I'll be putting the link in the chat box right now. And Lucy?
Thank you so much, Lisa and friends, for coming tonight and giving us the lowdown on global competence. I think this was an excellent way to start our series and to kind of lay the foundation for our future work here. So thank you so much. It was really informative. For those of you who may have come in late, this has been recorded, and we will be uploading it to our website, which is globaled.tv, and to YouTube as well. We will send you a link. Maybe I gave you the wrong link, Peggy. Sorry. We will send you a follow-up email with all the information that you need. Lisa, maybe you can give me the list of resources and I can include that in that email that goes to everyone as well. And then finally, in addition to this webinar series, we also are going to be launching Global Leadership Day or Global Leadership Week pretty soon. It's kind of soft launched right now. But look for some exciting things to happen the last week in April around elevating this conversation, getting decision makers involved in creating programs like we heard about tonight, and implementing tools like we've heard about tonight, because I think that's part of the puzzle here. You know, we need to get those people engaged in talking about this, not just the practitioners. So thank you again, everyone, for coming tonight. On behalf of Lisa, Steve, and myself, we thank you for your time. And we're very happy that you joined us for our inaugural episode.